anyone wants to know how much powder I use. A hefty amount. Hefty. Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Lipstick and Lore. Roll the intro. Today I'm going to be your host in the spooky, strange, unsolved, conspiratorial, and historical stories that plague my mind and now have to plague yours. Today's case is that of the Collingswood Boys, which is a newer case, I would say. Not newer, but I've recently heard about it. And that's the case we're going to be covering today. So it does involve children. So if that is too much for you to stomach, I do suggest that you click out of this one and meet me in another video, because I try to put out 2 a week. And I will not yap anymore because I yapped a lot in the last intro, and let you dive feet first into this case. And welcoming back, voice over me, because this seemed to go well last time, so we're gonna do it again. I don't know. Once again, let me know if you guys like it better when I do a voiceover or when I do like the non-voiceover where I'm talking as I'm doing the makeup. Let me know what y'all like, because I don't know which one I like better, really. I think I like both. But I want to know what you guys like down below. And today's case, I know I give like a visual warning at the beginning of these videos, but I want to give a verbal warning for my people who listen instead of watch. This one is going to be heavy, and it does involve children, and I know that upsets a lot of people. So I'm warning you now, it involves children. So if that's, gonna affect you too much, catch me in the next video, okay? But if it doesn't, continue watching. Also, my nails are different. Focus. Okay, well, there you go. They're purple. So, yeah. And without further ado, let's get into today's case. Okay, so today's case is just all levels of bad. It involves starvation, children, child abuse, and neglect, which all terribly awful things. So if any of that upsets you, check out, catch me in the next one. Take care of yourself, But this is a case that was recommended to me by one of my absolutely gorgeous friends. So shout out to her, because she is iconic. I don't know if she wants me to say her name, so I'm not going to say her name, but she's iconic. And I have never heard of this case before, so I'm really glad she recommended it, because I am always down to learn new things. And if you guys have recommendations, let me know in the comments down below. But today's case takes place in New Jersey, which I've never been to New Jersey. I've been to quite a lot of places, I will say that, but never New Jersey. I have, however, heard that it's a pretty cool place. I've heard it's very close knit. I don't know if that's true though. So if I have any New Jersey people, let me know in the comments. But this also happened on the 10th of October in 2003. Technically it happened before that, but it got outed October 10th, 2003, which was before I was born, so it's kind of interesting. And we have 4 victims here that are all still alive. So this one is, I don't want to say a happy ending, but sort of a happy ending, because nobody's dead. And we love that. So this is 4 adopted children, and we're specifically going to be focusing on the 4 boys. There is 3 girls who are also adopted, but I could not find a whole lot of information on them, if I'm being completely honest. So I'm not really gonna talk. I don't even know their names, actually. And also, I just feel like it wasn't that important to really look into them, because they're not a part of, they're a part of the case, but they weren't abused, which I'm not saying that doesn't mean that they're not important, but I just wanted to focus on the 4 boys because that's what I could find most information on, and also those are who suffered the most. But we have the 4 adoptive boys, and we have the 2 parents, which are Raymond and Vanessa. Also, if I'm looking down here, that's where my notes are, and I want to make sure I get all the information correct. So that's why I'm looking down there, in case you're wondering, because some people asked me, were like, why are you looking down there? It's where my notes are. And I actually handwrite all my notes in case anybody was wondering. That's not really a flex, but it's just what I prefer to do. Also, there's a fly. I'm so sorry. It's summer and there's bugs, and there's unfortunately nothing I can do about that. So, the parents, Raymond and Vanessa, their last name is Jackson, and one of their kids is named Michael, so I don't want anybody to get confused. I'm not talking about the Michael Jackson, though that would be a sick video to do. I'm talking about Michael Jackson, not the Michael Jackson. His name just so happens to be Michael. So these 4 boys are known as the Collingswood Boys because it took place in, you guessed it, Collingswood, New Jersey, which, from my understanding, is right outside of like Camden, New Jersey. So in that sort of area, and it's like a smaller suburb. And on October 10th of 2003, the absolutely torment of these boys was outed by a neighbor. And this was because they saw the oldest boy, Bruce, who was 19 at the time, rummaging through their garbage. And when confronted, he really couldn't give them a clear answer other than he was looking for food. So, needless to say, the neighbor called the cops, as they should have, because what do you mean? You're looking for food in my trash can. Whoops. So they called the cops, and when the cops arrived, they could not believe that Bruce was 19. They were flabbergasted at this, and they actually thought Bruce was lying. They thought Bruce was pulling on their leg, yanking their chain, because Bruce was only 4 feet tall at the age of 19. And he weighed about 45 pounds. So when the police came and got Bruce, he looked like an elementary schooler because he weighed 45 pounds. He was 4 feet tall, which is the average weight for someone in roughly elementary school. I think like early elementary school. I think it was like 2nd grade. So they didn't believe him. They thought Bruce was, not 19. They thought he was lying until they got a call from his adoptive father, Raymond, the next day reporting him missing. And that's when they realized that, oh crap, he is actually 19. Because Raymond basically had called and said that Bruce was missing and that he is 19 years of age and gave his description. And that's when police learned that Bruce was telling the truth and that he was, in fact, 19. And immediately after that, alarm bells started going off because that's not a normal weight for a 19-year-old. That's not a normal height for a 19-year-old. So police immediately go to the Jackson household. And what they find is not only horrific, but sort of confusing. So after this absolutely terrifying revelation, the police immediately go to the Jacksons' 3-story rented house. And it was in the blue-collar suburbs of Camden, and specifically Collingswood. Collingswood? Someone let me know. I think it's Collingswood because there's not a double O, and I feel like if it was Collingswood, there'd be a double O. Anyway, police discovered that there was 6 more children in the Jacksons' care, and all of them were adopted or foster children, so none of them were the biological children of the Jacksons. I don't believe they had any biological children. None in the house, so I'm assuming that they just didn't have any. There was, however, one girl who was not adopted yet. She was a foster child, and she was a week out from being adopted. I I think it was by the Jacksons family. I couldn't confirm that, but I'm pretty sure the Jacksons family was going to adopt her. And I think that's how most of the children came to be, is that they originated as foster children and then became the Jacksons' adopted children. So they had in total 7 adoptive children, with Bruce being the oldest at 19 years of age. And what the police found is that the 3 girls who were there were completely fine. They were clean, they were healthy, they were a healthy weight, they looked to be relatively normal children. But what they found on the flip side was the 3 boys all looked very similar to their brother, all completely emaciated, all completely malnourished. All of them looked to have been abused and just worse for wear. I would say they all looked very not in good condition, whatsoever. And this immediately led to a full-scale investigation by the police department and would later lead to a trial. So all the other children in the house were under the age of 15, and the boys, I will go ahead and go through who they were. I'm not going to go through the girls' names. Like I said, I didn't look into them really. I couldn't find much in the sources that I had. So there was Michael Jackson, who was 9 years of age. There was Tyrone, who was 10 years of age. There was Keith, who was 14. And they all weighed 23, 28, and 40 pounds, respectively. All very much underweight. Like, these children were, I mean, Keith was 40 pounds for a 14-year-old. That is absolutely insane. That's nowhere near the weight that he should have been at his age. And they all looked sickly. Like, it wasn't that they were just underweight. They all looked terrified and sick. And when, like, originally questioned by the police, they didn't really come forth with anything, and they seemed very skittish. That's what police reported, which oftentimes is a telltale sign of abuse, when children do not want to speak to especially adults. And we saw this a lot in the Ruby Frankie case, which you'll see that some of the tactics used by these parents are very similar. So if you have heard of that case, which I think most people probably have, you will definitely see a lot of similarities between the two, which I think is really interesting because this happened way before the Ruby Frankie case, but it just shows you that the tactics that she used weren't new or necessarily her own. They are definitely well used tactics by awful people like the Jacksons. Police describe the boys to be around half the weight that they should be, saying that their bellies were distended, their ribs were showing, saying that they all had limbs that were stick like, and that honestly they looked like walking skeletons, which is quite alarming, if I do say so myself. And one investigator who had been originally interviewing the boys said that they looked like Holocaust survivors, which, I mean, that's a pretty terrible thing to compare them to, but honestly probably very accurate, seeing as the boys probably didn't have proper food for years. Um, and that is very similar to what Holocaust survivors would have looked like. And after the boys were discovered, they were immediately hospitalized, and doctors said that they were severely malnourished and that they had probably been that way for an extended amount of time. So this wasn't like a new development. This was something that had been long term and going on, which led investigators to turning to obviously the people who did it, which was the Jackson parents, Raymond and Vanessa, which I love the name Vanessa. sucks she's an awful person. Shout out to my Vanessas out there, you guys. I'm sure most of you are great, and I'm sure you do not claim her, but yeah, she was an awful person. In addition to the obvious malnutrition, the boys had also been found to have head lice, all of them, and were also said to have pretty much like no personal hygiene, and Bruce's teeth were pretty much rotting out of his face, which uh, I can't imagine. I've had one cavity in my life, and that was an absolutely terrible experience that I never ever want to go through again. Can't imagine having them literally rotting out of my face. And I'm not blaming him. Like, that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying that's gotta hurt. That's gotta hurt. When the adoptive parents were confronted with this information, because obviously, who else would it have been? Um, they attempted to account for this mistreatment of the boys by saying that all of them suffered from eating disorders, which, I mean, yeah, they probably do, but I don't think in the way that these parents were claiming. They were claiming that the boys had eating disorders as a result of being um having fetal alcohol syndrome, which basically means that when they were in utero, their biological mother who birthed them, drank, and like to a point where the baby actually absorbs the alcohol. There's look it up. There's a whole like scientific thing that I'm not great at, but that's the gist of it. Like the mother drank while it's the same thing with mothers who take hard addictive drugs when they're pregnant. It's sort of similar to that because the baby can actually get like also can come out addicted to drugs because of that. So the adoptive parents claim that they had fetal alcohol syndrome. Now later on, we're going to get a testimony. Spoiler alert: a testimony from the biological parents, and they deny this. And the adoption agency has not come out and said that this is true in any capacity. So I'm going to go out on a whim here and say that allegedly, in my opinion, that's not true and that they lied. But, who am I, just a goober on the internet? So whatever, I suppose. But they also claim that the boys had suffered sexual abuse in their childhood with their biological families. And I just want to say that the boys came out and denied this and said that they did not suffer sexual abuse at the hands of their parents, especially Bruce, whose parents we're going to hear from later, said that this is in fact not true and that never happened. So I don't know. Sounds like liars to me. That's my personal opinion, and that's what I'm going with. They sound like liars, and that's all I have to say about that. They also claim that Tyrone, the 10-year-old, suffered from dwarfism, which dwarfism, I don't really know how to like explain this. I googled it, but I didn't really understand it. But basically, like, it's where the rate of growing isn't the same as the average person, so they're they don't grow as much, I guess. That's probably a terrible. I'm so sorry to anyone who has dwarfism. I just butchered that explanation. I promise you, I did Google it, but it went like straight over your girl's head. Sorry about it. But they also said Bruce suffered from specifically bulimia, which, if you don't know, this one I do know a lot about. Bulimia is an eating disorder where you have both binges and then purges, and you go back and forth on both. So, like, you'll eat a bunch of food and then you'll, like, till you're basically sick, and then you will force yourself to throw up all of the food or something like that. A lot of people like will stick their fingers in their throat and make that happen, or you will eat all of it and then like the next week you will eat absolutely nothing and you'll go on fasts basically. And it is one of I mean, all eating disorders are very hard to recover from, but bulimia specifically is one of the hardest ones to break for the simple fact of like there's such big highs and lows. Um, and it's hard to just pick one, like not pick one, but it's hard to find the happy medium in that situation because like it's not like anorexia where you're fighting one side of the battle, you know? With bulimia you're fighting both, so it's a very hard eating disorder to deal with because you have to do both, deal with a binge eating disorder and then deal with like a fasting. So it's definitely a hard one to deal with, I would say. And they alleged that Bruce had this. Bruce came out later and said that he did not have this, and this was not true. So once again, suspicious, liars, allegedly. I have to say allegedly because technically I can't prove that that isn't true, but come on now. Come on now. Anyway, but these were the adoptive parents' explanation as to why the boys were so malnourished, which that's a terrible excuse, really. That's what police officers would be like, oh, yeah. Yeah, that's definitely, actually, I do know. We've had a couple of cases where the police officer probably would have bought that. But these police officers didn't, and good on them because they should not have. As this investigation ensued, it came out that state child welfare um, workers did come out to the house. I couldn't think of the word. I was like, what do you call those people? CPS, but I think in New Jersey they're called like DYFS or something like that. There, it varies from state to state and country to country, obviously, what they're called, but basically like child welfare workers. I think in the UK it's like DCFS or something like that. Um, anyway, though the caseworkers came out and multiple of them visited the family, including the year which was 2003 when this came out. The caseworkers had visited the house 38 times. And nobody had any questions. Nobody thought, they don't look so good. Maybe we should pull them out. I don't know. The adoption system in America is just I it's got some flaws. And by it's got some flaws, I mean a lot of flaws. A lot of flaws, most definitely. But none of the caseworkers who worked with this family seemed worried about this at all. They did not seem to suspect that the boys were being abused, and I shouldn't say that. There was no official reports of the boys being abused, so that makes me assume that, like, no one suspected anything, because if you did, you'd think you'd report it. I don't know, I'm not a genius, but you'd think you would. Okay, sorry, the angle changed a little bit because I had to plug you guys in. Anyway, as I was saying, none of the caseworkers seemed very concerned with this, and they believed the adoptive family's excuses without any critical eye. And Bruce, especially, had lost a lot of weight since his adoption in 1996, and I mean like a significant amount of weight, especially for his age. And the other boys also seemed to be like just as rapidly losing this weight, so the fact that nobody questioned was a little weird. And the state not only approved the adoptions, but also put the boys on the special needs registry. And this basically meant that the family was entitled to more compensation for the children. Because if you didn't know, when you adopt a child, a lot of the times you are, I think all the times, but don't quote me on that, are like you qualify for financial aid because you are taking on these children. And if they are special needs, a lot of states will give you more funding, which personally I don't know how I feel about that. In some cases I think it's good, and then in some cases I think it motivates the wrong people to want to do it. I think if you're going to be an adoptee or a foster parent, you're doing it because you want to help children. I don't think you should do it because you want a child of your own, because at the end of the day, it's not your kid. And I think, like, you should love them as your own, but you have to understand that that kid is not your kid, and they might not see you as their parent. Not all the time. Sometimes it's different, but you have to understand that they might not see you as their parent because they had parents, you know? And I think that we need people with the right motivations. And I think the money is helpful for those who are doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. But I think it sometimes motivates the wrong people, like these people, to do it. And the reported amount that the Jacksons were getting per year for the boys was 28,000. 28,000 a year, which like is not that much, but like is that much, you know? Especially because you're not getting it because you like are working for it. You're getting it by the government because you have these children. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't get money. I'm just saying that like the Jacksons probably saw that and thought cha-ching, instead of, oh, I should use this for these poor children that are now in my care because they didn't have the right motivations when getting foster and adoptive children. Furthermore, there was zero record that the boys had ever been to the doctors while in the care of the Jacksons. They had never been to the dentists while they were in the care of the Jacksons. At least the boys, at least Bruce, had no record. All the boys didn't have any record of going to the doctors or the dentists, which another red flag because if you have these children, especially children in like adoptive and foster care, because you want to make sure a lot of them come from homes with issues and things like that, so you want to make sure that these children are healthy. And also like it is your literal job, like the state is giving you money to take care of these children. You'd think you'd have the money to go take them to their doctor visit, you know? I I just it just baffles me that you're getting $28,000 a year. And I know that's the doctors are expensive or whatever, but you're not even going for their yearly checkup. Like, come on now. Come on. Get it together. Truly. These parents suck. The Jacksons suck, dude. I'm not even kidding. Like, they actually make me so angry. It came out that the boys were allegedly fed a diet of only peanut butter sandwiches, uncooked pancake batter, raw oatmeal, and what was the other thing? Oh, and dried up grits, which I'm sorry. What? It was the pancake batter that really got me. Because I hate the smell of pancake batter. Like, I think it smells gross. It smells like paste. You know when you used to, like, do paper maches in elementary school? That's what it smells like to me. It smells like paste. Ugh. And I can't imagine eating that. Like, I'm already a picky eater. You want me to eat. Like, I can imagine that texture is just like paste. Straight gloop. And I can't imagine being told you have to eat this. What? I'm not eating that. No. Well, I mean, I guess if it was the only thing I had to eat, absolutely I would be eating it. But also, ew. That's disgusting. And then uncooked oatmeal? That's like what you put in soaps. You put like uncooked oatmeal in soaps for like an exfoliator. I don't want to exfoliate my insides. My goodness. What awful people. What awful people. And these foods are actually quite common in a therapy style called attachment therapy, which is used by mostly abusers. It's used by awful people. Um, it was used by Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt, and it is now being used by, well, it was being used by the Jackson family. And this is a system that basically it's hard to describe, and I did a lot of research on it, but it's still hard to sort of put into words. So I will link a source down below if you want to read more on it because it's actually quite like morbidly fascinating. But it's sort of a way to break children down and rebuild them in a way that is very authoritarian. It is very much like the children need to be cleansed and completely broken down and then rebuilt to understand that the parent is superior to them in every single way. Um and like from the surface reading about it, like their core values, which I'll tell you in a second, you're like, oh, this sounds great. And then you read more about it and you're like, this is awful. It's really, all the cases I could find of it were bad. I couldn't find a single case where someone had used it and it was good. And even pediatric professionals have said that not only is this therapy style cruel, but is detrimental for children. So if that doesn't tell you anything, I don't know what does. That like pinkish eyeshadow. So we're going to redo that. Sorry, I'm having a day. But the core values of attachment therapy is safety, both actual and felt, high structure, connected parenting, intentional parenting, and self-care, which from like an objective perspective isn't bad. Like those all sound like good things, but the way they're used in such extreme measures and twisted to be more or less against the child, that's what makes them detrimental to children welfare. And the Jackson family used these to the absolute extreme, and it led to the detriment of these children. Absolutely. They kept the kitchen alarm locked, which basically meant that if you opened it without a code or without the key, it would make an alarm sound. And as if that wasn't enough, they also padlocked the refrigerator. So let's say by some chance they got past the alarm system, the fridge was padlocked, so they couldn't get any food. So the boys couldn't even like sneak food. That's probably why Bruce was digging in his neighbor's trash can. And this is a very common part of attachment therapy, and it is controlling food, and it is used as a punishment, and it is another thing that Ruby Frankie also did to her children. She also withheld food, and there's many cases, especially with child abuse cases, where um food is withheld or the kitchen is locked up because food is a reward for these children, even though it is an absolute necessity to live. A lot of these parents will use it as a reward. Furthermore, the authorities believe that there was a big element of pinning the children against each other, which basically means that the girls were treated a lot better than the boys, and that was sort of used as almost a humiliation tactic, and it was used to sort of, yeah, pin the children against each other. So that is also a common tactic used in this sort of parenting style. And I say parenting, this isn't parenting, this is abuse. It's abuse. um and that is pinning children against each other, whether it's by gender or it's by race or it's by, I don't know, what age. It is often used, and it's sort of like, well, look at your sister, why can't you be more like your sister? If you were more like your sister, then this wouldn't be happening to you. And that's often how it's used, and it is a psychological tactic, really. And it can confuse a child a lot because obviously a child is not going to understand, like, you don't deserve this, and it's not because your sister's better, it's because your parent's an awful person. So it is a tactic that police and investigators often see, especially linked to these kinds of cases, and it is purely psychological. The boys were allegedly not allowed to eat and were left to starve, while the girls were allowed to eat pretty much whenever they wanted. It was also said that if they were allowed to eat, they had to eat on the floor or in a different room, oftentimes the bathroom, which is disgusting. And they also were said to, like, not be able to really interact with the girls that much, which also is disgusting, but like, I don't even, there's no reason for it. There's no reason for any of this, and sometimes it just angers me. But a spokeswoman for the New Jersey Department of Human Services said, quote, "What happened to these children is simply unspeakable," end quote. And the Camden County prosecutor, Vincent P. Serby, I think is how you say his last name, agreed and charged the adoptive parents with multiple counts of aggravated assault and endangering children welfare, which Good on him. Good on him. And once again, this foundation is too light for me. I don't want to hear a word about it. So, this brand new prosecutor guy, absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. Truly a great guy. He did a really good job with this case. He also said that the parents were not neglectful but purposefully abusive, which I agree with. I don't think they did this on accident. I think this was completely and utterly purposeful. And that's where I leave my opinion on that. Once they were, in fact, said to go to trial, they were held in jail for just a few days before the minister of their church bailed them out, which, why? For what? They don't need to be out. Let them sit in jail. Let them sit in jail. Let them sit in jail. I don't think they needed to be out, personally. But the Jackson story about the boys having eating disorders was pretty much quickly disproven, because within a month of being in police care, in fact, not even a month, within the first week of the children, the boys, being in protective custody, they rapidly gained weight again, which, who would have thunk? When you're not eating raw pancake batter, you put on weight. Oh, would have known. I don't know, maybe a normal person. But in the first month of being fed a somewhat regular diet, the boys regained 40% of their original body weights back, which, hooray! That's so good. But also, eating disorders? What? Where? Are they in the room with us? Because clearly these boys are eating, and clearly when they eat, they gain weight. So their stories are crumbling before their very eyes. During their hospitalizations, none of the boys showed signs of any eating disorders or disordered eating in general. Bruce did not show any signs of bulimia, and doctors said that their eating habits were in fact quite normal once they were given proper food. Like, once they had access to proper food, the boys' eating habits pretty much were fine. They weren't afraid of food. They didn't have any food aversions. They didn't, like, seem to want food too much. There was nothing that seemed like an eating disorder. And the doctors in that looked at them in the hospital said the exact same thing. The authorities said the exact same thing. So the Jackson story, needless to say, was completely falling apart before their eyes, because these boys didn't have any disorders. They simply didn't. And that's basically their only defense. So it's crumbling before we've even gone to trial. And the prosecutor called the evidence cut and dry, which I agree with. It's pretty cut and dry. I mean, no eating disorders. What's your other defense? What's your next excuse you're gonna give us? I'd really be interested to what you're gonna say after that. Oh, well, we didn't know. How do you mean? They were 45. He was 19 and 4 feet tall. What do you mean you didn't know? Hello. Also, if they did have eating disorders, right? Let's say that they did. Let's play devil's advocate. And the fact that he was 4 feet tall, you didn't take him to a doctor. And don't tell me you didn't have the money, because you had the money. So what? You didn't take him to a doctor? Either way, you're either neglectful and stupid, or you're abusive and equally as stupid. So either way, not a good parent. Parent of the Year award does not go to these two. Okay, I'll tell you that much. And by Christmas, 2 months into protective care, Bruce had grown 3 inches and weighed over 75 pounds. Keith had grown an inch and a half, and like Bruce, had gained a third of his height back, which is amazing. Tyrone had put on half of his original body weight and grew an inch. And the youngest, Michael, had added 80% of his original body weight back on and grew an inch, which is fantastic. That's like leaps in 2 months. That's a lot. That's gotta be a lot in your body, though. I can imagine, like, growing that much, I guess. But still, that's great. We love that, because that means they were getting better. But it showed that with proper care, the boys were in fact okay. And they didn't need like help for eating disorders, which is what they kept claiming. Even after all this evidence came out, the Jacksons kept claiming, well, they have eating disorders. Where, Vanessa? Where? It came out during the trial that the boys were very rarely seen by anyone, which is typically which is typically the case for most of the cases like this. And they were said to be homeschooled, and Vanessa Jackson claimed that she homeschooled them for 2 hours a day, which I don't know, I can't speak to because there was no evidence against this necessarily. But the likelihood of her like homeschooling them, I doubt. I don't think she taught them everything that they needed, realistically. Probably not. And that's not me dogging on homeschool, because I do think homeschool can be beneficial in some cases, but in cases like these, they're just a control tactic in order to isolate these children, um, which is very common. It's also common with like domestic violence with couples too, that the abuser will oftentimes, that's a lot of blush. I'm so sorry. I'm in the middle of a sentence, but that's a lot, even for me. But that the abuser will oftentimes isolate the victim because it's easier to control somebody who doesn't have anybody on their team. So this is why the boys were probably rarely ever seen, because then they had less of a chance to, one, have anybody see what was going on, and two, less likely to build connections with anybody, and less likely to have allies. They also were said to have went to church, which is the same church of the pastor minister guy who bailed them out of jail. And they were said that the boys did in fact attend church, but nobody pointed out that they were malnourished or anything. I don't know. I have questions for this church. It doesn't sound very good if they're not recognizing the abuse of these poor boys. It was also alleged by people who had seen the boys during this time that if they were asked if everything was okay, they would say, quote, no, everything's fine, end quote. Which is very common in cases like these, because oftentimes the children are coerced to believe that everything is okay and that what they're doing is either deserved or normal. So it is not very out of the realm of possibility that the boys were brainwashed into thinking that all this was okay. It was not. But this also, the parents also try to use this against the boys during the trial, basically stating that, like, well, see, they said everything was fine, which, oh my goodness, just annoys me, but whatever. After the case came out, neighbors did report seeing strange happenings, which they always do. One of the red flags that neighbors reported was seeing the girls frolicking and playing by the pool, while the boys had to cut the grass with only garden shears, which, if you don't know what garden shears are, I will put them up on screen. Right there. That's what a garden shear is. They had to cut the whole lawn with just that, which I don't even cut the lawn, so I can't imagine how awful that would be. That sounds terrible, especially if it's hot. I don't know how hot it gets in New Jersey, but if it gets like hot, ugh, it's gotta suck. Um, Another one reported that they heard the parents telling the boys that they could not play with toys, even though the girls were allowed to play with toys. And another one said that during a power outage, the boys were forced to sit in the living room in front of a dark TV with like the power being out, and were not allowed to move until the power came back on, which, what is that even? I don't even understand what that's teaching them. How is that a punish? Like, what? It's not their fault that the lights went out. Do you think they're like, they've got superpowers? They can just mess with the electricity? I mean, I wish. What are they, Michael Bay? My goodness. Like, I don't understand. Which, if you've read Michael Bay, and you got that reference, I love you. But if you didn't, it's okay. I still love you. But yes, it definitely, there was red flags that people saw in hindsight, because that's always what happens. Hindsight is 2020. When this case came out into the public light, it put a lot of scrutiny on New Jersey's child welfare system, because people could not believe that they could fail these children that bad. Like, they really could not believe how something so heinous completely slipped through the cracks. So there was a lot of public scrutiny, and there was a lot of people who were fired due to this because obviously they weren't doing their jobs very well. This was probably one of the worst mishaps of the New Jersey child welfare system ever reported, and a lot of the workers who worked with the boys resigned or were fired. Quote, "It's inconceivable how a caseworker could go there and not detect these atrocious conditions." End quote. This was said by an angry governor, James McGurry. I'm sorry, I'm so bad with names. It's actually quite terrible. He told this to the press, though. He said that quote, and he was like, "I'm angry because this is awful," which I agree with. It is definitely awful. Because of this case and how angry our governor guy was, he decided to make a whole new office for the child welfare system, which, I mean, he saw a need for action and he took that action. So basically, he hired a whole new head of this department, whose name is Kevin Ryan. 2 first names, but you know. And he also hired a law firm to help with the investigation of this case. So he wanted his stuff done, needless to say. He wanted stuff done, and I'll give him that. Kevin Ryan gave a statement, quote, "The suffering of these children was a sobering thing to me," end quote. Which I'm sure it was sobering to anybody in the town at the time. Because it's not like, you always think about these things happening, you never think it's going to happen in your area or to someone you know or to someone you've seen or in a place that you know. So it's definitely, I could assume it was probably pretty jarring. I could assume it was probably pretty jarring for these people. It'd be pretty jarring to me. Kevin Ryan also had said that, quote, "It just shows how broken DYFS is, and DYF families are. It needs to change," end quote. Which is good. I definitely think a lot of these systems need change and need reform and need people who really care and really want to improve them. So I think that is very important. He also got some backlash for this. Him and the governor got some backlash for this, basically with a lot of the protesters saying that, quote, "Caseworkers don't kill children," which is right. I don't think there's caseworkers out here murdering children. I don't think that's what's happening. But I do believe that negligence is a big killer. I think just because you're not the person wielding the gun, if you stand around and don't say anything, yeah, you're an accomplice basically. You're just as bad. It's like, see something, say something basically. And I think if you stand around and you don't say anything, silence is all I needed to hear. And it oftentimes speaks louder than words, because by you standing there and not saying anything, you're just as bad as the person doing it. But a lot of people didn't like this and said that the governor needed to leave this alone and that he was causing a big old stink for nothing. And what I have to say to that is, cause a stink. I think we need more people to cause a stink and care, because these things do need reform and change. But despite the backlash, the governor continued his changes, and he didn't really care. He said, irrelevant. Anyway, next question. And he continued on with the reform of DYFS. And they basically added new training and things. They added a whole new office. They had more police trainings on how to deal with these things. They did a whole internal investigation about this because of the negligence that happened to these children, which I think are all good things. I think he was doing what needed to be done. So the minister that bailed out the family was interviewed, And when he was interviewed, he specifically had a lot of things to say about our boy Bruce. He said, quote, "When you examine several incidents that concern him, you realize he's a liar," end quote. Which, okay, when you examine several incidents pertaining to the Jackson parents, they're also liars, allegedly. So, I mean, could pot me kettle, I suppose. He went on to say this in the actual trial when he was called up to the stand, which, why would, that's bold and not in a good way. Once he said this on like the public trial that happened, he was quickly exiled from not only the church but his community as a whole. People, needless to say, did not like that he said this and thought that it was distasteful and just downright bad, like evil. And the prosecutor said, quote, "You've made the children, the victims, seem like the predators," end quote. This sentiment was echoed by Kevin Ryan's, the head of the new welfare office. He came out with a quote that said, quote, "The villainification of Bruce is despicable, and I am begging the advocates of the Jackson parents to stop," end quote. Which I agree with. There's always, in all these cases, there's always a group of people who come together and defend the killer, which, you know, I think that's okay when it's a movie or a video game. Like, listen, in a movie, I love a bad guy. I love a bad guy, truly. I get in arguments with people all the time because I like the villain. I truly do. I I like the villain, you know? And people will tell me, "Well, you're not supposed to root for the villain." Well, sometimes I do. But in this case, like, real people were affected and real children lost their childhood, and these are like awful, despicable people who had zero reason to do this. Don't defend them. In the wise words of Bailey Sarian, my idol, get better idols. No more words to be said. She said everything I needed to say there. The Jacksons themselves continued to deny and stick to their story that the Boysel had eating disorders. But once again, their story crumbled faster than a Chips Ahoy cookie, I fear. Because when they were in police custody, where were these eating disorders? When they were hospitalized, where were these eating disorders? When they were with their birth families, where were these eating disorders? Their story just wasn't adding up. It wasn't adding up. It wasn't making sense. It wasn't holding together. But honestly, to further prove that these parents weren't good parents, like even to the girls, when they were permitted visitation before their sentencing in jail time, they were permitted to visit their other adoptive children. And the whole time they were in there with their other adoptive children, instead of like consoling their children or giving all their love and affection or like being like, "Oh, it's gonna be okay," you know, or "Oh, I'm gonna miss you." None of that. None of that. You know what they spent their whole time doing? Telling the other children that Bruce had fabricated the whole story and that it was his fault that the family was being torn apart, and basically trying to poison his siblings' minds against him. That's what they spent the whole time doing. So I don't know what to tell you about that. Like, I truly have no words. I just need to let that sink in for a second. They spent their whole visitation with their children telling them that their brother was an evil being and that this is all his fault, not their fault for abusing him. No, that's not it. It's their brother's fault. It's their brother's fault. It's the brother's fault. You know, if he just would have kept his mouth shut about being abused, our family would still be together and happy. Shut up. I'm so sick of abusive people blaming the child. That's a child. That's a child. Stop blaming a child. I hate when people do that. I hate when people do that. So, needless to say, the family went to court, got up in there, and continued to keep their stance. They told their whole story was based upon the fact that Bruce was a liar and that the children have eating disorders, and that's what their attorneys told the judge and the prosecution, and that's what they stuck by throughout the whole investigation. Not once did they show any remorse. Not once did they seem apologetic. Not once did they seem upset until they were sentenced. So if that doesn't teach you what kind of person we're dealing with, I don't know what does. But due to this last interaction with the other foster children, there was a bail, what do they call it? Like condition that if they were to get bail, they weren't allowed to have contact with the other children, which is probably for the best because clearly they cannot be trusted and clearly they're not in their right minds. So good on that. And when they were bailed out by the pastor guy, they were not allowed to have contact with the other children, the 3 girls, or the boys for that matter. But that was already like before they weren't allowed to have any contact with the boys. But now they definitely weren't allowed to have contact with any of the children because they're terrible people and they shouldn't have. But they continued to stick with the story, saying that they had been sexually abused as children. They added to the story, in fact, in the court. They said they had been sexually abused as children, the boys, and that they were not only suffering from fetal alcohol syndrome, but they were, quote, crack babies, end quote. Which, okay, I don't even know. That's, Your Honor, relevancy, question mark? Hello? Okay. But beyond this, they just continued to allegedly lie, stating that these children had all sorts of problems, which it's very interesting because when you adopt a child, there is a lot of privacy laws with those adoptive children. It varies from state to state, but overall, there is hefty privacy laws for adoptive children.
Super quick voiceover because my mic decided to die. Basically, all I was saying in this clip is that there are very strict privacy laws among adoptive children that don't give the adoptive families a lot of information on their past life unless it is like medical reasons or abuse. So basically everything that the Jacksons listed would be the only information that an adoptive family would get about their adoptive child. But other than that, they don't get details about the child's upbringing with their birth parents or birth family or anything like that, unless the child tells them, obviously. But that is basically all I said in this clip. So, sorry about my mic dying. I forgot to charge it. Okay, back to video me.
Is about all they would know. They wouldn't know a lot. But due to this becoming such a public case, the birth parents actually came out. At least Bruce's did. I couldn't find if any of the other ones came out, but I know Bruce's did. So, Bruce's biological parents came forward and claimed that his birth was good, rather uneventful. There was no complications, and he was overall a happy and healthy baby. And the mother had told the press that, quote, she was not involved with any drugs or alcohol, end quote, which would discredit the story of the Jacksons because their whole thing was, oh, he's got an eating disorder because he's got fetal alcohol syndrome. Well, if she wasn't involved with drugs or alcohol, then he would not have this disease, which would mean that their eating disorder story is not valid, which I already don't think it's valid, but, this would just further prove it. And Bruce's father came out and said, quote, he ate like a horse. The kid always had a good appetite, end quote. Which is kind of, I don't know, that's just a dad thing to say. He ate like a horse. Yeah, describe your son. He ate like a horse. Okay, I mean, sure. You know what? Okay, Dad. Cool. super cool, super, super funky fresh. But both of these direct quotes from the parents basically disprove that the son had an eating disorder. I mean, it doesn't fully disprove it, obviously, but it gives a good example as to why he probably didn't have an eating disorder. It was alleged that the birth parents lost Bruce due to neglect and not abuse. So basically, that sort of means that Bruce probably didn't have any of these conditions. He probably didn't have fetal alcohol syndrome. He probably didn't have an eating disorder. He probably wasn't a crack baby, as they called it, because he wasn't taken away from them due to abuse. He was taken away from them due to neglect, which I believe was due to poverty. I think like they were poor, so they just couldn't take care of him, and that's why Child Protective Services or the state took him away from his biological parents. And this was sort of, I don't want to say the nail in the coffin, but it sort of confirmed the public's opinion that the Jacksons were awful people. And Bruce did end up testifying against the Jacksons, specifically Vanessa, in the trial. And all of the brothers did, actually. But I think Bruce's, one, he was the oldest. Two, he was the one who sort of blew this operation out of the water, I'll say. And he was also very protective of his other brothers, which I think added to it all. And he gave some great testimonies, and I will read you some of them here. Not all of them. I'm going to link them in the sources below, in the description. You should definitely go check it out because he is so well-spoken, and I could not be more proud of him. He said, quote, "You would make us eat pancake batter, dried up grits, and uncooked potatoes instead of cooking us food," end quote. Quote, "You didn't take us to any doctor's appointments. You didn't let us play with toys or watch TV. You didn't even let us take showers when we were dirty," end quote. Quote, "You yelled at us, cursed at us, and hit us. I still have the marks to prove it," end quote. Quote, "I want to see Miss Jackson go to jail for life," end quote. Quote, "You were mean to me my whole life, so you deserve the same thing you did to me," end quote. And all of those are very powerful statements, and the other boys gave statements too, but I am not going to go through all of those because there's so many good ones. I'm just going to include Bruce's in this video, but if you do want to go see what the other boys said, I do recommend checking out the description below and looking at the sources. I believe it says like angry son testifies against mother or something like that. Look at that one and read the testimonies because all of them are insane, and what happened to these boys is awful, and the fact that they could come out and still be so well spoken is just incredible to me. And this trial did end up in sentencing. Not life like Bruce wanted, but they each got 7 years in prison, which is good, but also not great. I'm glad they got sentenced, but they could have been in there longer. Most definitely could have been in there longer, but, they didn't ask my opinion. Wasn't a jury member. But each of them were sentenced to 7 years in prison, and the boys were granted a settlement of $12.5 million, and the state gave Bruce $5 million, and the other boys will get $1.5 million, which, no amount of money is going to fix what happened. No amount of money is going to give them their childhood back, but at least they got that. But I'm going to go do lips and lashes, and I will be back to give you my final thoughts on this case. Okay, so my final thoughts on this case is that I am absolutely glad that the boys got some semblance of justice. Do I think it was enough? Absolutely not. Do I think they could have sentenced them for more? Absolutely. But I am glad with what we got, because at least we got something. And I also believe that the boys are incredibly strong, and I believe that this case is absolutely heartbreaking, and I'm glad that I could bring awareness to it. and bring awareness to the fact that this happens to so many people in foster and adoptive care. The adoption and foster system in America is disgusting, frankly. And if you are an adoptive or foster kid or were, sound off in the comments because I'd love to hear your stories. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about today's case. And I will hand it back over to outro me. And that is all I have for you in today's case. Once again, I hope you enjoyed it as much as you can enjoy a true crime case. I hope it wasn't too heavy for you, but if it was, go outside, touch some grass, play with your dog, talk to a family member, put on some cartoons, do something that makes you happy because your happiness comes first. And don't forget to let me know your thoughts, theories, and concerns in the comments down below. And as always, please be safe, be smart, be yourself. And I will see you in the next one. Hopefully, don't forget to like and subscribe. I love you. Bye bye.